Your mini bio. Oh no, it's live.
I'll cover the exciting stuff.
Are we ready?
Yeah, it's loading, but it should be live whenever you're ready.
I don't really understand what that means.
It means we're live.
Okay. Welcome to zFest. um, Guest artist talks. This is Jackie Leclair, who is my teacher personally at McGill. So she teaches at McGill, obviously, oboe. And she's a oboe master in all sorts of styles, but particularly focused on contemporary music. Uh, and she's doing a lot of cool stuff that she will tell us about. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks for being here, everybody. Great to see you. Great to participate. Thanks for having me. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'll tell you about myself and what's germane in terms of playing music. And then I've got three stories to tell you after I introduce the topics, and then maybe open it up for a conversation. Maybe some ideas, provocative. In terms of me, I started playing oboe when I was 8. I was from a low income household, but I was lucky because my grandparents were loaded, and I went to this really fancy school. So I had amazing teaching, amazing school, inspiring teachers. I loved it. Terrific music. We learned to read music when we were 6 in first grade, and in second grade we all learned recorder. There were 7 of us in our class, and then my teacher recommended oboe as a instrument for me. So it wasn't my choice. I knew about classical music because we went to the Boston Symphony Orchestra when we visited my grandparents in Boston, but it was just sort of a chance that she recommended oboe. She wrote a note home to my mom, and boom, that was it. So I got an oboe, and I thought, oh, this is cool, because I had played piano. It wasn't really my thing. Singing, not a great voice, but I really liked oboe. I thought, this is awesome. This is super cool. I just loved it in sort of a kinetic, athletic way. It wasn't like a musical way. I would get a book of exercises and hold the book. It's like, I'm going to play every single note in this book. It was really kind of that kind of jock mentality. And so I decided when I was 9 that I was going to be a professional oboist, because I had to look up the word oboist and then practice saying it because it's actually a really hard word to say. Oboist, very difficult. So from then on, from age 9, I focused on music, and I practiced, and I had oboe lessons. I was really lucky looking back. Of course, when you're a kid, you got no idea what the quality of your experience is because you're just a kid. But looking back, I had very good teaching and very good guidance with oboists and all that. So I went to performing arts high school, and I knew it was sort of my ticket out, if you'll forgive the dramatic expression. I mean, I knew I could do it. I knew I could be successful on oboe. I just knew it. And I don't want to say I was desperate, but I urgently practiced every day. I, I skipped class to practice. I got up early to play all my scales at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was sort of an emergency. Because I didn't know how good I was, and I didn't know how good every other kid was. I was almost panicked trying to get as good as I possibly could get on a daily basis. I was very, very, very motivated. Let's just say. And a lot of that just had to do with my circumstance. If I lived in a comfortable suburb in Connecticut with, a safe environment, I don't know what I'd be today. So who knows? There's no laboratory in which we can test these things. So it turned out I was good. And I was accepted to all the schools and all that. And I chose to go to Eastman. And in hindsight, that was a good choice because I was very much a perfectionist. And if I'd gone to a teacher who was really hard on me or kind of old school, I think I would have snapped like a twig. So I was lucky that I went and studied with Richard Kilmer, who was very accepting and inclusive and broad-minded and respectful of other traditions. And he was a really great mentor for me, I see now in hindsight. And then Ronald Roseman, same thing. When I went and started my master's with Ronald Roseman, I had no idea how much excess tension I was carrying and using in my body. No, and we all have excess tension. It's an oboe, for Christ's sake. But he he one time he said, keep playing, Jackie, keep playing, I'm going to punch you in the stomach. And he didn't punch me. He just put his fist on my abdomen and pushed me, and I went back like that. And then he played a note. He said, do the same thing to me. I'm like, all right. And he was like a mountain. He would play like just like Tai Chi. He did Tai Chi, and he was like super, super rooted, super grounded. And then on another time, I didn't realize I was holding tension in my upper legs. And I was playing Strauss Concerto or something. He said, keep playing. And he came up to me and he put his hands on both of my thighs. And, which is probably not something I would do to a student. But I instantly became aware. That's very powerful. If you just touch someone, they become aware of what they're doing in a way that you could talk until the cows come home. You're tense in your thighs. Like, I'm not sure I would have gotten it, but he touched me. I was like, oh, I got it. And there was no question that he was completely appropriate and trustworthy and safe. I mean, it never even entered my head. One time, I have to tell you, he was trying to get me to use a good embouchure, which I never actually developed. But he was trying to get me to pull my chin down, which I never learned to do. But we were in front of one of those lousy mirrors that's stapled to the wall in music schools, little, rectangular mirror. And he had my pinky in his mouth, like his embouchure. And so my pinky was in his embouchure, and his pinky was in my embouchure. And we were standing in front of the mirror looking like, okay, see that, Jackie? You got it. And at the time, even though that's hilariously funny, I didn't think it was funny at all. I was trying to learn an embouchure. In hindsight, that's incredibly funny. But he was a great, great teacher, Ronald Roseman, as was Mr. Kilmer. So I was lucky to come up in those studios, and then I sort of, in a very casual way, took an audition in New York City when I was 24. And won the audition to be an associate principal oboist in a Spanish orchestra. To tell you the truth, I didn't even prepare for the audition. I just walked in and hit each ball out of the park. Just one of those funny things. So I went and played in a Spanish orchestra for 3 years, and that's when I realized, oh, this is not really for me. I love orchestra. What's better than Beethoven's Seventh Symphony? But it doesn't suit me. I like to play new music. I like to play chamber music. I like to choose the music I play. And in orchestra, you don't get to choose the music you play or with whom you play. So I realized this is not for me. I had gotten into new music at the end of my undergrad when a fellow student, James W. Bennett III, who was a composer, he kind of organized some concerts of Charles Wernin's music and Elliot Carter's music. And I realized that I really enjoyed learning new things and playing high notes and figuring out multiphonics. And Mr. Kilmer was like, well, figure it out, bring it in next week. Like, okay, I will. And it was really cool. And I enjoyed the spirit of adventure and discovery and the different kind of cognitive requirements. I really enjoy that. It's just, some people are not the same way. Some people enjoy playing Baroque music and classical music their whole career, which is awesome. That's fantastic. It just turns out that my brain is really happy swimming in different new music languages, waters, as well as playing old music, of course. I love Baroque music and classical music and romantic music and all that as well. So I moved from northern Spain to New York City when I was 27. I'd gone to Spain when I was 24. And when I was 27, I kind of was an immigrant to my own country and moved to New York City. I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And I was like, okay, make a living in New York City, go. So I was working, part-time jobs, selling, trying to raise money for the New York University's dental school on the phone. It was not really fun sort of thing. But, I did what I had to do to survive and gradually started gigging and eventually started playing new music and joined some new music ensembles, joined a wind quintet. And actually the wind quintet got together just because we wanted to read new music. We were a bunch of 5 new music nerds. And some of the people were still at Manhattan School of Music, and one person was still at Juilliard, I think, so we could get rooms at those schools. And we would just grab music out of the library and read it, we're just like a super nerd fest. But then we happened that quintet, our horn player Greg Evans, he got us contracts with Carnegie Hall neighborhood concert series, and the Midori and Friends Foundation. This is back in the 90s, and they paid us real money to go around to libraries and schools and do educational presentations. We did that for years, as well as playing recitals. So what started out as just a bunch of nerds getting together to read music in a dingy practice room turned into a really great opportunity educationally and professionally. So, I wound up performing a lot in New York City and earned a reputation as someone who was able and happy to play new music, and that wasn't a big group of people. There weren't a lot of oboe players willing to do that. So, it's kind of like, you don't remember, there was a commercial where on TV, back when there was TV, and there was a little kid said, have Mikey try it. Mikey will try it. And so I was the one who would, I'll play anything. So I was having a great time and earning a living, and when I was 37, it'd been 10 years, I kind of had this realization, like, well, you know what? If I haven't impressed anyone in New York, well, the hell with them. I'm probably not going to impress them. And I felt really happy. I felt very successful. I was having a great time. I was getting better all the time. I felt fantastic. Life was just sort of a dream. And I thought, you know what? What would make sense is to kind of cash in my chips and get a teaching job, so I don't have to play every Peter and the Wolf that comes along. And I can choose my concerts, and I can have this sort of foundation of a full-time salary and benefits and the opportunity to do research, because I like doing research. I like writing papers. I like giving master classes. I like, all those things that are not as easy to do when you're a freelance, because a freelancer, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, doing every job you can really quickly. So I went back to school to finish my DMA, because remember, I'd left when I accidentally got that Spanish orchestra job. I went back to school and finished my DMA while still supporting myself in New York City, which is 3 semesters of panic. But I did it, and it was fortuitous when I applied for the job at BGSU. It was a 1-year position, actually, because the guy who'd been there since God was a boy retired at last minute, and so it had a 1-year opening, and then did a tenure track search a year later. I did not apply for the 1-year position, which could have been unwise, because normally the person who gets the 1-year position, it's easier to just keep them for the tenure track. But I was lucky that I had applied a year later for the tenure track position, and I was very lucky that they offered me the job, and I moved to Ohio. So for 5 years, from 2007 to 2012, I was back and forth between Manhattan School of Music teaching and Bowling Green State University, which is a very good college of musical arts there. And that was interesting. And then out of the blue, McGill contacted me and invited me to apply for the position that I'm in now. And I figured, oh, what the heck, free trip to Montreal. And so you could have knocked me over with a feather when they offered me the job, because they didn't offer me the job until April 15th, which is really, really late. In the National Association of Schools of Music, NASM, in the United States, they run searches earlier in the calendar. So I had kind of forgotten about it, and I got this email offering me the job. So that was a surprise. And so I moved here to Montreal. Didn't expect it ever. But here I am, and I've been here 8 years. So that's me. I'm a simple soul. I play the oboe, and I really enjoy reading about music and learning about music, and it actually gets more and more interesting year after year. I'm more inspired and more interested and more curious now than I probably was 20 years ago. It's a great, great, great life that I'm so lucky to have. So what I'd like to talk to you about are some topics. The topics I mentioned have to do with what's possible to play in music, what's impossible to play in music, what is a good fit for an instrument, what's reasonable to ask, is how to differentiate between something you haven't done before and something that's truly impossible. And I've been reading a book. I'm reading a book right now called Peak by Anders Ericsson, who sadly just passed away recently. Anders Ericsson is the person who coined the term deliberate practice back in the 90s. And I read about that back in the 90s, and I've known about deliberate practice and sort of been employing those concepts for all this time. And it informs a lot of the way I'm able to learn things in new music especially. And a couple things that just jumped out at me about how human beings have increased their abilities to do things. Some vivid examples. In the early 1930s, there was a pianist, Alfred Cortot, who was one of the most famous musicians in the whole world. This is the early 1930s. He played Chopin. He recorded the 24 etudes of Chopin, and that they were considered absolutely definitive. This guy was a huge star. That's 90 years ago. Now, if he played Chopin at that level, he probably would not be admitted to an undergraduate degree at most good music schools. It's very sloppy, lots of mistakes, all over the place. Isn't that interesting? And this is, from people who know what they're talking about. In 1908, Johnny Haynes, so 1908, that's the year Carter was born, Messiaen was born, my grandfather was born not super long ago. Johnny Hayes was he won the Olympic marathon in what was called the race of the century. And he won it in 2 hours and 55 minutes. It was a world record. No one had approached that. 2 hours and 55 minutes. The world record now is 2 hours and 2 minutes. 53 minutes faster. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Nearly an hour faster. That guy was the fastest guy in the world. Just over 100 years ago. And now, running his speed that won the Olympic marathon in 1908, he would barely qualify to run in the Boston Marathon. So that's interesting. Flips that were considered too dangerous to do in competition 50 years ago, children do now. And now we can all think about comparisons to music where what was considered unplayable in the 1790s or the 1830s or the 1850s, or Liszt etudes or Xenakis pieces, or playing the double bass up here. Now kids are playing the double bass in amazing ways that it used to be boom, 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 boom. So think about the bass clarinet. It's not that long ago that nobody was tearing it up on bass clarinet. Now bass clarinet is a massive rock star in classical music. Amazing. Super high, super low, super fast, slap tongue, multiphonics, everything you can imagine. So I have, and this idea of talent. Before I tell you the three stories I have, I found it interesting. I hadn't heard this before. A few years ago, they did a study in Japan. They took 24 children, aged 2 to 6, and they gave them daily training, just a couple, 3 minutes at a time, to memorize and identify 14 chords. And they trained these children, aged 2 to 6, for something like 9 months or a year, or some kids over a year, until they could reliably identify each of the 14 chords by listening to it. All 24 of the children, after their training was complete, every single one of the 24 children had perfect pitch. And the claim is that they've proved that all human beings, unless there's an unusual defect with the brain, all human beings have the potential to develop perfect pitch. And it's just a question of whether you do or not in that window of time. That there's no one who doesn't have that potential. And I thought that was really interesting, challenging some assumptions. And also this book basically, the book is Peak by Erickson and Poole. It's only a few years old. It's basically saying that it debunks the concept of talent being the reason people develop expertise. And it goes into detail why it's just not. That's not it. It's how you practice, and the amount of practice and the quality of practice. So that's very encouraging. And also that if you practice really, really well, and there's great now because there's studies that prove this. If you do a certain amount of practice, say for the left hand of the violin or whatever, you actually change the structure of your brain. You probably know this, neuroplasticity. It's been around for many years, last 10 years anyway. And the brain changes its structure to make more space to manage that expert activity. So in a way, when you're focusing and practicing a certain thing in a very deliberate way, purposeful, and in all the good ways that good practice is, you're creating talent in your brain. You're actually modifying your own brain to create more capacity for excellence. And if you just sort of casually play for 3 hours a day, it doesn't work. So the book is really interesting. It's sort of recipes to, if you want to practice, this is exactly how you do it, and we can prove it. And so it's really inspiring. It made me reflect on some of my history. So a couple of stories. But jump in if you have any questions or whatever. I'm totally, there's not that many of us. One time, it has to do with 3 pieces of music. Around like 97 or something like that, over 20 years ago, I was a big fan of the music of Ioannis Xenakis. I still am. If you don't know Xenakis' music, it's very, very singular. There's not much music like it, and I played in an ensemble that played only the music of Ioannis Xenakis, and we worked with him. He lived from 1922 to 2001, so we were fortunate to work with him in person on several occasions. He wrote a piece called Damathen, which is a made-up word, D-M-A-A-T-H-E-N, for oboe and percussion. And I'm an oboist, so I figured, well, I like Xenakis' music, so I'll learn it. So I just learned it for no particular reason, just because I was a fan. And there's this one note that's written as 3 ledger lines above the treble staff, F sharp, which is a high note. But then there's a bracket and the number 15 over it, indicating 2 octaves higher than that, which is just kind of blew my mind. Like, I couldn't even imagine that. Like, what could that possibly be? And at that time, there wasn't an internet, so I couldn't Google and there weren't recordings, so I couldn't listen to somebody else do it. And so I just was like, huh. And this happened at the long note. Note lasts about 10 seconds, but there's an ossia. You can also do C above, a tritone above that F sharp. C is a super high note, but I knew how to do it. But then, after that, there's a cadenza where the oboe plays alone for like a minute, and at the top is that note again, a short note, but that's the end of the cadenza before the short coda starts. So it was required, and I just had no idea. I just had no clue. So I learned the rest of the piece, and one day I was at the CD store. We used to go to stores that had CDs, and you'd pay money and then go home and listen to it. And I bought the CD, and it was by Burkhard Gleitzner. Burkhard Gleitzner, he played in what was then East Germany under Kurt Masur. He was an orchestral oboist. When he retired, he recorded a bunch of new music, so he'd secretly been harboring this love for adventuresome music. And he recorded the Xenakis, Damathen. So I ran home, threw it in my boombox. I was so eager to hear what happened, and he got to the long note, but he played the high C. I was like, so disappointing. But then it's like, all right, I gotta wait 45 more seconds, see what happens. So he played the cadenza, and then it goes high note, high note, high note, and then there was this. It sounds like a violin playing like this, like off the edge of the keyboard. I was like, and the sound went into my brain like a virtual ice pick. I was like, oh, and I kid you not, I turned off the boombox. I went into my studio, also known as my bedroom. I picked up my oboe, picked a stiff reed that I figured would do it, put my teeth on the reed, because the score does say dong, teeth. So you put your teeth on the reed. I knew that. You do that for C as well. And I fingered this F sharp, and I produced the same whistle first try. Like 15 seconds later. I'd spent years not knowing, but I heard Mr. Gleitzner play it, And it's like, oh, I understand. And boom, I played it on my oboe. And I thought, well, there you go. Because one of the characteristics of that this book talks about, experts, people who are very, very good in their work, they tend to have very, very good imagination of what they're going for. Like if somebody grabs their viola and sort of figure, all right, I'm going to prove this suite is by Bach or something, sort of vaguely, that doesn't lead to excellence. Common sense would tell us that, but so having a precise idea of exactly what you want, that's a key to achieving real excellence. And so I thought, and I didn't know any of this, but I thought, well, there you go. I didn't know what I wanted, so I couldn't do it. Once I knew it, boom, no learning curve. The second piece I want to talk to you about is a piece by Toru Takemitsu, who lived from 1930 to 1996, Japanese composer. I'm sure you know his music. Beautiful. He wrote one piece for oboe. It's called Distance, and it's for oboe and sho, S-H-O, and there's a thing over the O like that, sho. And the sho is a Japanese gagaku instrument. It's a court instrument, traditional, and you hold it like this, and there's lots of little pipes coming up like this, and it can produce single tones or it can produce chords. It's a really magical instrument, S-H-O. And this piece called Distance can be performed with or without sho. So when I was in the orchestra in Spain, I had, there's a lot of vacations in Spain. I loved vacations. So I had like a month off, and I figured, all right, I'm going to learn this piece by Toru Takemitsu, because I know he's famous, therefore I should know it. It's also why I learned the Barrio Sequenza. He's famous, I got to play it. Okay. Simple, I was a simple soul, still am. So in this piece, it requires a lot of multiphonics, and it's very modernist. There's a lot of modernist, what you could call extended techniques. Conceptually, the sho represents traditional Japanese music, and the oboe is representing very, very modern Western. So it's called Distance, so the distance between those two instruments and those two cultures and those two musical languages. I guess that's what I understand. And all of that's fine, except the piece requires the oboist to sing and play. So you're playing fancy modernist music, and you're also having to sing with your voice designated pitches and changing pitches and in rhythm. And it just blew my mind. It's like, what? And with oboe, there's not enough air traveling out of the body to sing. When you're playing the oboe, you can kind of go, and nobody wants to hear that. So I knew that in order to sing, you have to allow air to escape around the reed. So you kind of partially let go of the reed, so more air is traveling, and then somehow manage to continue to play the oboe at a high level while vocalizing. So a 25-year-old me, indignant, enraged, I picked up the pencil and I wrote on the inside cover of this piece. The date is August 1990 whatever, 1993. I've really tried to learn this. I don't think it can be done. Jackie Leclair. And I wasn't mad at Takemitsu, I was mad at the piece. And so that was the end of that. And then I went back to New York City. Wouldn't you know, about 10 years later, I went back to New York. I moved to New York, actually, for the first time in 94. So around 97, the phone rings. I pick it up. It was the Columbia University Medieval Japanese Society. I was like, okay. And I had been recommended because Toru Takemitsu he's the only person at that time, maybe it's different now, but at that time, he's the only person who had been awarded a posthumous doctoral degree. He had died right before they were going to award it to him. So they awarded him the honorary doctorate posthumously. And they were putting on a concert of his music in the Columbia University Library Rotunda. If you go in the gates, it's there up the stairs in New York City. A concert of his music to honor his memory. And they were bringing in the most distinguished gagaku ensemble from Japan to perform. And I had been recommended as the oboist to perform distance with this famous shote player. And would I play distance? And I remember perfectly well that this is the piece I couldn't possibly play and I was really mad at. And so I said, yes, thank you, I will perform that. And I thereby painting myself into a corner. And what happened after that, I got the music out, I remembered, and it would be good if I'd kept a journal. But what happened is I went from a state of absolute not being able to do it. I could play the oboe stuff, I practiced the singing part, but I just couldn't do the singing and playing part, and there was quite a bit of it. So what happened was I sort of total failure. And every day I just sort of experienced total failure, and I just sort of smile and go, well, that's interesting. I can't do it at all. Okay. Just kind of laugh, kind of smile. And the next day, total failure. I got to play the rest of the piece, but, and I had a deadline coming up. This famous person was going to show up. And at some point, I just kept smiling and laughing and thinking it really, really hard and trying to imagine what it would be like. I knew that I had to think it really, really hard. I had to imagine it really hard. And one day, I could just do it. So it kind of went boom. There was no improvement. I just went from totally not able to do it, able to do it. And so it was a remarkable experience. And then the Columbia University people invited the gagaku people out after the musicians arrived from Japan. We all met at a fancy restaurant on the east side of New York to honor them. And I worked with this shote player. She was a tiny person, just sort of, she looked like monastic the way she dressed. She was like a foot and a half shorter than I am. I'm not sure if she was 30 or 60. She didn't speak. We rehearsed. It was very mysterious. And I was totally in awe of her. And we did some rehearsals and we performed it. It went well. And it was, and I felt better afterward because since she didn't say anything to me, I felt nervous, like, was I okay? I felt so like a big American, playing this Japanese music. And, but the organizer of the concert just told me later that she had spoken to him in Japanese and that she said nice things about me, which was great because she'd played the piece before. So that was a really remarkable experience. Again, the same kind of thing. I couldn't imagine it. And so I didn't have somebody else to listen to, and like as I did with the Xenakis, but I just kept pushing and pushing and thinking and imagining, and not getting discouraged by complete failure day after day. And then boom, it's like you go through a membrane and you go from not being able to being able as a surprise. You don't see it coming. And then the last piece I wanted to tell you about was piece that was just written for me. It was finished in March, and I recorded May 15th, the piece for English horn alone. And when I got the piece of seven pages, almost nothing on the 7 pages of music was recognizable to me. It's a huge, and I've been playing a lot of funny music for a long time, so that's saying something. It's a huge number of different kinds of microtones, lots of multiphonics, but happening in rapid succession with lots of funny fingerings I'd never done before, like half-holding the A key, which I'd never done, and much less in rapid succession, on, off, on, off, on, off. So it's a simple problem, but it was sort of, it could be overwhelming because there's 7 pages of it, and I had 4 weeks to learn it. And so that turned out to be fortuitous because I was isolated in a pandemic, so that's exactly the right situation to be in for that, if you can concentrate. So I practiced it, and every day I would learn something. Like, even if I could learn, I figure, all right, I'm going to learn one measure. I'm going to learn this one measure, and just tiny little bites, tiny little baby steps. And smiling and cheerful, and I would learn something like, and I would say out loud, I was sitting right in this chair, I'd say, okay, you couldn't do that yesterday, you can do this today, you are getting it, you're gonna kill this is great. I might have sounded a little bit like a slightly unbalanced person, but I had to be like, all right, you're doing this, you are doing it, you're doing it, it's good, you're making progress. And once in a while I would have a day where nothing worked, where my brain just was misbehaving, and it felt just completely awkward and foreign and bonkers. And I would just laugh, like, that's okay. That's all right. I just put the oboe away, put the English horn away, and I would come back the next day, and it would be all right. But I've been giving people recommendations about efficient practice technique for years. And so I basically said to myself, okay, Leclair, this is it. Walk the walk. You have to do the most amazing practice. You have to avoid all the pitfalls, and you have to do all the optimal practice that you've studied and learned. And I did. I did. And I recorded the piece. When it was 10 days out, I was like, all right, you got 10 days. And I still couldn't play some of it. And some of it I couldn't get up to tempo, and so on and so forth. 7 days out, 5 days out, 3 days out. And yeah, I could have moved the date, but I didn't want to. I thought, you know what? I can do this. I'm going to do this. It's crazy. It's like climbing a mountain, but I can do it. And I remembered on May 15th, I woke up and I sat up in bed and I smiled. I said, today's the day. And I went into the recording studio, and I recorded it, and I'm really delighted with it, and the composer's really happy with it. The composer's Carola Obermüller, Obermu, umlaut, Ller. So, and that was another experience where I was in a state of not being able to do something, and I became able to do it. Now, with regard to the Obermüller, I would tell you that, I'm introduced as an expert in contemporary music. I'm 53 years old. I'm considered an expert. I could have told Carola, particularly two passages that were just blankety blank awkward, like seemed bonkers. Just what I physically had to do to accomplish what she'd written, it just seemed impossible. I could have told Carola, you know what? Love the piece, coming along, but you know what? These 3 notes here and these 2 notes here, it's just not swinging. I think we need to find another solution. And she's totally cool. She would be like, oh, no problem. I'm sorry. Sure. I can find a different solution. That's fine. No problem. But I didn't. I was like, you know what? I can't do this right now, but I think if I just keep trying and trying and trying, I think I can find a way. And like the passage that ends the piece is a looped series of multiphonics. Each one's a different multiphonics, and some of which are very, very awkward. About a week or 10 days. I was smart, actually. No, that was a good strategy. I learned that passage first. That's the first thing I learned, because it seemed really gnarly. And there was a point where I sent my friend Eugene Isotov, he's an oboist in San Francisco. It sounded so funny to me, to be playing stuff I'd never played on the English horn. I recorded myself going ba da 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 da, and I was like, doesn't that sound amazing? And he emailed back, whatever. But that was a tempo I could do it. Dum, next one, next one, next one, next one, next one. And then, a few weeks later, I was da 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 da. I was playing at that tempo. It's now my ringtone on my iTunes, by the way, that passage, which is an extremely alarming experience every time my phone rings. But I felt it was an amazing experience to be looking at those 7 pages, and then 4 weeks later. So what? I can play this. I can play the whole thing, and I did. And you can buy the CD. It's out in October. The piece is called "Different Forms of Phosphorus." So I just thought that was interesting. And then as I'm reading about human learning, it's sort of a lot of this is resonating. What they're saying about kinds of practice that works, practice that doesn't work, talent. It's so like that makes sense. So that's what I wanted to talk about, and because I know these are provocative topics, and I think especially for younger people, like, is someone better than you? Did you win the competition? Did someone else win the competition? Are you talented? Are you not talented? These are emotional questions that we can be sensitive about, And I find it very heartening that, science is increasingly offering answers to these questions, and that we can sort of disabuse ourselves of these insecurities or misunderstandings that sort of abound in classical music, and especially among musicians who may be your teachers, who have never played anything like this, and they feel comfortable, since they're also experts, but maybe orchestra excerpts, experts. Excerpts. I automatically say the word excerpt after the word orchestra. They're orchestra experts. A lot of famous musicians say that's unidiomatic. That doesn't fit the instrument. That's unreasonable. And I don't think that's true. I think it's just a misunderstanding. You can choose not to learn to do it, but that's your choice. There's nothing wrong with the music. And then just to finish up now, I believe, and some of you have heard me say this before, there's no easy music and there's no hard music. Difficult music does not exist. When you find yourself saying, this piece is hard, you're saying something that isn't true. It's okay, you can say it, but it's not true. There's no difficult music. There's no difficult music. Why? Because it could be fast, it could be high, it could be complicated, it could be whatever, but for something that's hard for me, it's easy for somebody else. Something that's easy for me, it's hard, so hard exists in your head only. The hard does not exist on the page. Nothing here is hard, nothing here is easy. And that seems unintuitive, but I strongly believe that's the case. And so when you hear experts say, oh yeah, Le Tombeau de Couperin, yeah, it's really scary and it's difficult, incorrect. Maybe it is for you, but don't put that on me, don't put that on your student. Especially if somebody's famous and powerful, they say, this is a difficult excerpt. You've contaminated that person's brain, possibly for the rest of their career. Why would you do that? I've performed Le Tombeau de Couperin 3 times professionally. It didn't feel difficult to me. It felt exciting and inspiring and beautiful and lively and interesting, but it wasn't scary. I didn't find it scary. I found it very exciting. I was nervous, but I wasn't scared, and it was certainly not difficult, So, and I would even say, like, that for that Obermüller, the piece on the English horn I learned, is it difficult? No. I couldn't do it, and then I could do it. So I just really think as a community, we should just stop using those words, because it's incorrect. It's just false. It's just a long-standing, deeply lying misunderstanding. And it's big. Why is it a big deal? It's a big deal because it creates obstacles for people. And as teachers, that's the opposite of what we want to do, isn't it? We want to facilitate ourselves. We want to facilitate students. So we just need to cut it out in terms of labeling things as difficult. Oh, let me read the chat now. Thank you for listening to me, my stories. I appreciate that. The name of the book is Peak, P-E-A-K. You see that? Can you see it? Awesome. Yeah, Erickson. If you Google deliberate practice, it's been around 30 years, and some people say it's this, some people say it's that, but he coined that term. Okay. When practicing passages in the piano. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, language study. Oh, my goodness. Oh, yes, exactly. Immersion. Yeah, part of what I'm talking about is immersion. That's exactly right. I immersed myself. Yep. The brain is processing in all kinds of ways that is imperceptible to us. And I think, when someone says, oh, Professor Leclair, I'd really like to learn flutter tongue. I can't flutter tongue. And this thing like, well, I tried to learn to flutter tongue. It's like, did you really try? I think a lot of us, especially when it's something with the tongue, you try, you can't do it. Oh, I can't do it. Oh, well. And I think a lot of us, we give up 5 minutes before you're going to break through. Keep trying. Just keep trying. Always just keep trying. You'll get it. So let's see. Some of the best music. Oh, tambo, yeah, for sure. Right, right, yeah. I mean, no negative associations with it. Heavens, no. It's wonderful. Multiphonics can take a while to speak. Well, now, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like anything else. You find a way to do it. Yeah, it's actually multiphonics are really easy on oboe. If you finger any high note and underblow it, I can. Like if you play a high E, I haven't played a note today. There it is. That's a high E. If you just underblow it, you get multiphonics. That's a C, high C sharp fingering. If you let the reed vibrate too much, you get multiphonic. So multiphonics are important to know. Really easy on the oboe. Really, there's hundreds of them. They're really easy to produce. In any particular musical situation, if you want it to be precisely this or precisely that, you have to practice it. But multiphonics are much more challenging to produce, are much more elusive on the single reeds and on flute. So don't tell anyone they're hard on the oboe or they're easy. Don't tell anyone they're easy to produce on meaning simple. They're simple to produce. You just finger it and go. It doesn't take fancy work with the embouchure tongue as it does on the single reeds and the flute. So like one time I played a piece with a multiphonics years ago, and John Sampson, who's a very, very famous saxophonist, he was my colleague. Jackie, wow, those multiphonics, just one after the other coming out just perfect. How did you do it? I'm like, yeah, well, put in the time, John. Just practice. So don't tell them it's so easy on oboe, but they are easy on oboe.
I did do that to a saxophone player once when I wrote, but I was also working with a specific person who could do this. So I wrote him a piece that has like a bunch of multiphonics everywhere with very specific things, and then made the mistake of showing it to another saxophone player who was just like, how?
Yeah, and it's in new music, I can flutter tongue. It's super, super no problem for me. A lot of oboes can't flutter tone. So if you're a composer, do you write it for me, knowing that other people can't do it? It's one of these things that if somebody writes it, oboists will find a way. If composers don't write it, we'll never find a way as a community, So I think we just need to keep moving forward and just find ways to do what's in composers' imagination. And I would say that the fact that somebody says it's unidiomatic or it's difficult or whatever, don't let that slow you down. There's a maniac somewhere like me who will say, sure, no problem, I can do it. You got to find us.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Hi, you got to go, Christina?
No, I wanted to comment if I could.
Oh, awesome.
I do have to go though, so thank you.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Well, this is really challenging. I appreciate the engagement of these, the challenge of your thoughts. I mean, even in the course of this month working on the 4 projects that I'm doing here, I've had at least one occasion that I'm remembering where I said to a composer, he wasn't happy with the way a certain sound was coming out in one of the higher parts that I wasn't singing, and glad not to be, because I'm older than you, Jackie. But I commented to the composer, I said, if you want to actually be able to understand that vowel in that word, you can't write it on a high B.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the physics of what happens to the oral tract when the instrument here has to contract to produce such fast vibrations to get that pitch. So, it raises the interesting question of, I mean, at some point there are physical limits to what can be done, right? Or maybe it's the question of what's the limit given the personnel I'm working with and the deadline, and then what's a false limitation? So, I mean, I think, we all hear the famous stories about the players complaining to Beethoven that, you can't sing the Beethoven 9, you can't play it. And now, of course, everybody does it every year. It's a challenging conversation, I think.
Well, yeah, and I can't stand up and jump to the second floor of my loft from here. I can't. It's not possible. No matter what, I could never do that. Even a really good basketball player could not jump from here to the second floor. That's impossible. And I think it's just to navigate that territory and just sort of move the line. because there's lots of oboe players who flatly consider things impossible that are possible to do. Lots. And so to find where is that territory where is it really impossible? Or I can't articulate that fast, but some people can. And to, just to sort of keep an open mind. There's something about the human brain, if you think I can't do that, it's like a metal door slamming shut. Yeah. Like all the possibility just sucks out of the room. A story I often tell is I was coaching a new music piece at Juilliard 20 years ago, and a flutist was playing alto flute, and there was flutter tongue, and she had to start it from not flutter tongue to be flutter tongue, and she was doing the growl, and it was bumpy. She wasn't really experiencing success with it. So while someone else was doing something else, I said, "Oh, that flutter tongue is not quite comfortable for you." She said, "Oh, I can't flutter tongue. I have to growl because I can't roll my R's. I have to growl." So obviously someone had told her, since you can't roll your R's, you have to growl, which is just a ridiculous fiction that is, again, another thing ingrained in woodwind. That flutter tongue is completely wrong. That you can flutter tongue with the tip of your tongue or the back of your throat. That's totally wrong. It's anatomically incorrect, what is written in books about woodwind technique. It's false. And so so we finished rehearsal and she put her flute away. I said, "You know what? I bet you can flutter tongue." And so she looked at me with her case open. I said, "Just pretend you're about to say the word cat. Flutter there." She's like, she fluttered. She said, "No way." And I said, "Way." And she put her flute together and flutter tongued. So that's my world record of getting rid of the slammed shut iron door in her head that some teacher probably slammed shut in her head. She's perfectly capable of flutter tonguing if she can't roll her R. So even, with all due respect to my colleagues, there's a lot of false beliefs out there that famous people tell people who then become famous people who then tell you. It's not true.
So that's a flutter uvula.
There's different. I'm fluttering the tongue here.
With what you just did? Oh.
Yeah, it's the.
What does that have to do with cat? Will you do that for me again? Explain how you got that from cat.
Well, you're touching where it's the middle of your tongue, and then I keep the tip of my tongue against my lower teeth. So it's like jalapeno, chutzpah, ha 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 ha.
That's uvula, yeah. Well, with the tongue, anyway. Yeah.
The uvula is not involved. Yeah, it's farther forward. The uvula is not. Yeah, it's in the middle.
I think I say cat differently from you, but that doesn't matter. You go ahead and go, and then I have another question for you.
That way you can articulate. It's all the same control.
Same sound.
You don't need more air. You don't need. It's a piece of cake. Flutter tonguing on the oboe. It's a great example of a major misapprehension that almost everybody seems to have. It's
wow.
Book after book. Yeah, flutter tongue's either impossible or difficult to produce. And of course, if you tell a composer, "Oh, this is difficult to produce," well, I'm not going to write it. It's not difficult. How difficult is that? And you can stop and start it. You can do it high. You can do it low. Difficult.
Nice.
I don't know what they're talking about.
I wanted to ask you about those really, really. Now, I'm not allowed to say that they were hard, but you talked about those skills that for the longest time until the last minute you could not accomplish, and then suddenly you could. And you said that composer, Obermüller was her last name?
Obermüller, yeah.
German last name. That she would have been amenable to altering those 5 notes that looked impossible, but, you just barreled through. And I'm just interested to know whether, I think that the payback for us as musicians. Ooh, now we're getting a weird echo. Am I okay in everybody's ear?
You're okay. No.
Okay, great. When we can finally do something that we formerly thought we could not do, that gives us a benefit just as human beings trying to cope with being alive, that I think we learn to appreciate extra musically as well as musically. I was just interested in the question of how much, how important was that decision to the aesthetics of the piece, or would it have made no difference to the composer and the feeling of the piece, but it was actually just part of your journey to get to finally play that stuff? You know, was the greater benefit to you or to the piece?
Well, I'm always trying to serve the music. That's interesting. You know, I haven't thought about that. It's been 2 months. Let me think about that. I remember, struggling, and I like the word struggle. Struggle is a positive thing for me. You know, you struggle to climb up a mountain, yeah, and then you're at the top of the mountain. Struggle. That's the way you do it. So I know there's other uses of the word struggle, but and also I think it's just a really cool word. Struggle. Struggle sounds cool. It's got a great sound to uggle. You know, anything uggle is cool. I didn't consider. I actually guess I didn't consider asking her to change it. I just didn't consider it. I thought what I told you is that I could have. I only thought about that later. Before I recorded it, it never crossed my mind. I was just locked in. That it was a foregone conclusion. There was no option. That I was just going to do it. I guess that's the answer to your question. It never occurred to me. I made the decision to learn everything on the page, and it was very, very foreign and took a ton of work. I just had to change my brain. You know, it's not this. It's to reformulate things in my actual brain. That's what I had to do. And it takes a lot of concentration to change your brain, and I only had 4 weeks to do it, or 8 weeks to do it. I just understood that the page it's there. This can't change. This can change. The music can't change. I can change. I can't do it. Well, yeah, but I will be able to do it. That's just the basic tenet. So the fact that I could have asked Carola to change it, that only occurred to me like in June. That I was just making a point when I was talking to somebody about this concept. But yeah, I mean, that's part of it, is that there is no side door. You know, I think that's part of why I was able to do it. If I had known, like, you know what, I could ask Carola to change this, I'm not sure I would have been able to learn it, because I would have given myself an out. There is no out. There's only one possibility. I'm going to play it. But it's so much about attitude. As soon as you're like, well, I could change it, or maybe I will say I did slow those down. I slowed down those two passages. So if you listen to the piece, when I go dee da dee doo da doo da do da do, there's two places, and that's why. Which fortunately I think works aesthetically, but my goal is to realize, because I think Carol is brilliant, and I wanted to arrive at an understanding, and my assumption is that I just need to understand better. I have to find it, and the idea of changing the art object to fit my inabilities doesn't make any sense to me. So you see what I mean? Because I can change. Whoops. My iPad thinks I want something. Let me see. Oh, Uggle. Yeah, Uggle. Love Uggle. Oh, let's make a piece for oboe and voice on the phonemes in the world struggle. Ah, love it. Ooh, please. Oh yeah. See that? No one told that the multiphones were hard on flute until after. Exactly. I learned flutter tongue when I was 21 or 22, because I just learned in graduate school the piece Vier Stücke by Ernst Krenek. And there's this little place where I didn't flutter tongue. I don't think I did. You have to do something like, you have to just play soft and in tune, and with piano, so you have to be sort of in tune, and piano flutter tongue. And so I just worked out the flutter tongue using the middle of the tongue, not the uvula, not the tip, just sort of the middle of the tongue where you say jalapeno, that kind of. And nobody told me I couldn't do it, so I just did it. And it was years later I realized that people are like Holliger. I have great respect for Holliger. He's a genius. He just had his 81st birthday in May. He was born 1938. 1939. Tremendous respect. He's a genius. But his flutter tongue's no good. he flutters with the tip of his tongue. You know, you don't want that going on when you're playing the oboe, do you? And in order to accomplish that, allows air to escape around the embouchure. But that's like letting go of the steering wheel when you're driving down the road. But since he's so revered, a lot of people use that flutter tongue. Sometimes it's better than others. I actually heard Holliger play the other day, and he actually used a more controlled flutter tongue. I was like, oh, yay, awesome. And then all the books, they say you either use the tip of your tongue or the back of your throat, which is incorrect. That's just wrong, as I've demonstrated to you. That's the thing. I didn't know I couldn't do it, you know? And I also, the personality is someone that says, oh, you probably can't do that. I'm like, well, maybe I can. You know, I don't, my personality is like, you know, I could try. I'm not that easily discouraged, maybe. Some people are more sensitive or something. But yeah, I find it, I wanted to talk to you all about this idea of our assumptions, and we all accept as true things that aren't true. I think probably everybody on this call thinks something's true that's not true. That's just how we are. And to, as people alive on the earth, as long as we are, to try to maybe identify those, especially if it's an area where you're an expert, which is music for us, to try to evaluate, you know, am I making assumptions that are incorrect? Yeah, you probably are. What are they? Well, try to figure it out. And to respectfully challenge authority. Famous people say wrong stuff all the time. So to be like, okay, well, let me transpose that to what I understand, so that, and it's a really interesting journey to find what works best for, and it's to serve the music. Obviously, it's not about me at all. It's about making the music come to life as well as possible, whether it's Bach or Berio. You know, it's not about, hey, listen to me play this. And like, no, not at all. It's embarrassing if anybody thinks, if somebody says I have a nice tone, or like, oh, it's embarrassing. I just want the music to be, you know, taking shape. But anyway.
Jackie, I have a question
Great.
about kind of quarantine specific. I feel like I know myself and other people have sort of been, I don't know, some people have been struggling to keep up their practicing during this time. And I'm curious, one, if you have any stories about taking time away from the oboe and then coming back to it. And then two, when you do come back to it, do you have any suggestions for how to practice when you're getting back in after a few months or longer hiatus?
Sure. To do it in, I think everybody, there could be variations, of course. I like the idea of tiny, tiny little bites, for the oboe, or to just take the mouthpiece, take the reed, and just produce the tone, because the muscles are going to be, you know, the strength of earthworms after that much. It's going to feel terrible, in a way. But the muscles are very small, so they build strength very fast. If you just take the reed, where'd the reed go, and produce a tone, you know, do that for a few minutes a day, over the course of the day. Just make a tone on the reed. That's the oboe. You know, it's a very small oboe, but it's an oboe. You know, it plays 5 notes. The reed. And then when you're comfortable doing that, to do little bits at a time, and to set. I do these practice videos about how to elevate your mood with your practice. And one of the best things to do is to practice like 3 or 4 minutes at a time, 2 minutes, whatever, and to say, okay, I'm going to play an F major scale, 1 octave, just to try to get the sound going, in tune, feel the embouchure, make sure my body's staying balanced, the head's up, good position. And just 3 minutes, and set a timer or keep track of the time with your readout on your computer, whatever. And so plan it, then implement it, stop, and assess it. The human brain really, really likes organization. It really likes connecting things and knowing how you're doing. Imagine if you're playing a video game. You know how you're doing. You're not just sort of, you know what your score is. You know if you're blown up or not. If you're playing a tennis game, it's only fun if you really know how you're doing, and and you're not. If you're much better than your opponent or much less good than your opponent, it's not really fun. You don't hit any balls. So to set up a situation where your brain's going to be happy, which is, I'm going to do this, I did it, okay, now next thing, go to a different topic, do that for 3 or 4 minutes, plan it, implement it, assess it, like, all right, that was all right, I've heard worse E major scales in my life, and then plan, okay, now I'm going to do some Le Tomba de Couperin 5 times more slowly than concert, okay, cool, do it, how was it? Yeah, that was nice, I was getting, the low B's were coming out, that's awesome. And then go back to your F major scale. I'm going to do it in thirds this time, first 3 or 4 minutes. So so if you do that in these little chunks, it's called interleaved practice. Interleaved, L-E-A-V-E-D, like that. And that's a scientific thing. You can look up research about practicing. It's more efficient. You accomplish more, but you're happier doing it if you want to look it up. So if you imagine you do, there's 4 top, a scale, an excerpt, a concerto movement, and a sonata that you want to practice today. If you do 10 4-minute chunks, 4.5-minute chunks, alternating those topics, imagine that quality of experience. For each one, you plan what you're going to do, you do it, you stop and assess it. Then you go to the next topic, you plan what you're going to do, you implement it, you do it, then you assess how to go. Then the next topic. And so imagine that 50 minutes versus just 50 minutes of sort of following your nose, kind of vaguely sort of doing this and doing that, and I have to get into shape, and maybe I'll do this and maybe I'll do that. It's not a recipe for feeling good, really. It's sort of, because you're not really sure what's this or what's that. It's not terrible. I'm not saying don't ever do that, but there's a lot of evidence that shows that interleaved practice, or you could think of it as cross-training, I tend to call it cross-training, is much more easy to do. It's more motivating. It makes you feel happy. And when you walk out of the practice room, if I go up to you and say, how long did you just practice for? How long? You say, oh, about almost an hour. I said, okay, what'd you practice? You can tell me in great detail what you just practiced. You know exactly what you just practiced and what you're going to do next time and what's better and what's not so good. As opposed to the guy in the practice room next to you who's just practiced sort of whatever, Bach and Mozart and some Berio for 50 minutes, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That person comes out of the practice room and say, hey, Steve, what did you just practice? Oh, well, I'm working on, right? So it's really a big difference, free of charge, by the way. There's no fee for using interleaved practice. It's a lot more fun, a lot more. So to answer your question, I think to put little very, very achievable goals and plans, and then do them, and then pat yourself on the back, like, yep, I did it, I'm awesome. And then the next thing, do it, yep, got it. And I'm a big fan of smiling as a professional. Smiling and even laughing. Smiling as a very serious professional technique. Because when and I strongly suggest to get in the habit of smiling when you get your instrument out, smile when you soak up your reed, smile. It doesn't have to be a real smile. Because they did studies and they had people off like this, didn't tell them why. Even when you do a fake smile like that, the brain spits out serotonin and dopamine reliably. Like if you smile right now, your brain will squirt out these great chemicals that lower stress, improve your mood, improve focus, improve and if you don't have enough of these dopamine and serotonin, that increases anxiety and can lead to depression and all of that. So if you think about the hormones that you excrete in your brain when you smile like that, increase focus, elevate mood, concentration. Yeah, I want those in my practice. You bet I do. And why do you have to make it a habit? Because when you practice, you're alone in the room, aren't you? So we tend to be like, all right, got to do this. We tend, without realizing it, we're all like, looking all serious. It's not helpful, actually. So I recommend coach yourself. When you change topics, when you turn a page, smile. And especially those of us who can't smile while we're playing, string players and pianists, they could actually smile while they're playing. We can't. So especially if you can't smile while you're practicing, use it as a technique, and I'm dead serious. It is a great, and there's lots of evidence about this. Look it up. That's easy to find. Smiling to improve, not just mood. It used to be just pleasure. It's not just pleasure. It's all kinds of good things for human cognition. And without the social cues to smile when you're practicing, I really think it's one of the best things you can do to accomplish more as a musician. Isn't that funny? Chime in, everybody. I'd love to hear
I had a
from you.
question.
Yay!
I was wondering, as a composer, if you'd have any advice, say in a workshop or rehearsal scenario, when communicating with performers who consider something to be impossible, especially in group scenarios where doing it in a respectful manner that's also accommodating.
I'll be right back. Hang on a second. Actually, I'm not expecting anybody. What day is today? I don't think I should be receiving anything. Anyway, sorry, my doorbell just rang. Yeah. I think that is tricky. I think I think it really probably depends person by person. If someone seems hostile or insecure or really uncomfortable, obviously you can't push them. It's and I think that's where you strike me as someone who has really good communication skills. You could ask them. I think it's helpful to say, okay, I want you to feel comfortable with this, and to tell them what they're going for. What I'm going for in this measure is a sense of, fill in the imagination, to tell them what you're going for and why you wrote it. And is there a way you could, sort of find a way that this is what my imagination is, and I was imagining the saxophone, doing this, and probably avoiding, there's a guy in Michigan who can do it, probably not saying something like that. But there might be a window open with a person's mind. I think just finding that open window, to find most people aren't going to be completely hostile and tell you to go jump in a lake, but it's just finding that open window to get them to try something new. But yeah, I think it takes some artistry and communication to find what that person's willing to do. There's no magic answer. Yeah, because like what Christina was saying, that we're in real time. The concert's Thursday, or it's 3 months away. We'll go learn this new technique. But if I had only 4 weeks to learn that new piece, maybe I couldn't have done it. Maybe that would have been too much. So we all have to navigate it and work together to find what's possible. But yeah, I think asking questions and asking, and to give them your imagination and what can they do. If they can't flutter tongue, well, do a timbre trill. That's, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Feel free to challenge me if you think I've said anything crazy.
So do you have examples of when you have told people that it's like it doesn't work on the oboe?
I'm thinking. There are some things like the oboe can't play a low G. Like, yes, that's correct. If somebody just has a misunderstanding about what notes, hey, Jose. Not really. When there's, I think, and back when I was in New York City, I would do like composer readings at Columbia University for the student composers, or NYU, or I've done that all over the place. So you just get this tsunami of stuff, and some people are young composers and they just try every trick in the book. It's like, oh my God. It's really a lot of fancy stuff. You know what? You know what I do? I don't really remember. I could be not remembering, but it's been a lot of years. But generally speaking, when I encounter something that I can't do and I need to do it by 4 o'clock today, I can't go on an epic journey as I did with that other piece. If I have to do it now, I fake it. I'm good at faking it. Counts, people. If you can fake it convincingly, awesome, go for it. I try to find what's needed here, what can I do, and probably almost 10 times out of 10 it's fine. So I tend not to say this can't happen. I just find a solution on my own. I might ask the composer, what are you going for here? And then say, all right. And I find either a simpler solution or a more comfortable solution or a more elegant solution. But I feel that's my job. I feel like, look, I'm the guy playing the oboe. I got to do this. I got to find a way to make this work. So whatever works, whatever works. That's a good question, Shoshana. Thank you. Any other oboe questions or?
I was kind of curious about when you were flutter tonguing in the middle of your tongue.
Uh-huh.
I just can't conceptualize how that feels like. It's really interesting.
Can you say lachaim or jalapeno?
That sounds a lot deeper in my throat when I say that.
Yeah. So to realize the tongue's about that big. The tongue is gigantic. What we think of as the tongue is just the top of it. The tongue is huge. Like if you touch here, this is your tongue down here. The tongue is a gigantic piece of meat. It's 4 groups of muscles. 2 of the groups of muscles attached to the skeleton. 2 of the groups of muscles are just in the tongue alone. The left and the right side of your tongue function independently of each other. So part of having success with the tongue is understanding what the tongue is. And the tongue doesn't like to take orders. The tongue, if you think about it, when's the last time you did something very on purposely with your tongue? It's kind of unusual. The tongue does its thing 24 hours a day, helping you out in a big way on its own. And you might ask the tongue to get a result, like get this thing out of my teeth or something like that. But the tongue takes care of it. So the tongue is kind of a diva. And if you tell the tongue to do something, it probably won't do it. The tongue has to decide to do it. So what works with the tongue to develop a new skill with the tongue, even something mechanical like double tonguing, kitty, 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 I think what works with the tongue is to say, hey, there's this funny thing we might try if you want to, no pressure, and to just kind of ha 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 ha, and to find some kind of, and also your throat isn't making the uvule, that thing that hangs down in the back of your throat, could get engaged, wiggling around, but it's to think of it's your tongue. That it's your tongue, and then just to move it sort of forward, kind of. If you move the point of where the sound is happening, the turbulence forward, now it's closer to where the cat is. So just to play around with it, just monkey, it's like pretend like a kid would pretend he's gonna spit, patooey, or like Donald or Daffy Duck, Donald Duck. Just kind of, or languages, jalapeno, lachaim, ha ha ha. Just kind of mess around with it. And then when you have some kind of flutter that is more the middle of your tongue, then what doesn't work is for most people who are already expert players to be like, all right, I'm going to flutter tongue now because I can do it. To go, to add it to playing, your brain's not going to let you do that because you've learned to play the oboe so well. To just throw a wild wrench into it, your brain's going to protect you from that. So what does work is to take the reed and just add the reed to the flutter. To totally erase the idea of playing. Just kind of go, and get some kind of turbulence into the reed, and you'll find that your brain goes, oh, yeah, sure, I can do that. You know, it's there's these it's that thing of being no 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 no. Yep, I can do that. That's double. Flutter tongue is the most like that probably, just because it's so ineffable. It's not as clear as circular breathing or double tonguing. To get kind of flutter, and then eventually, and it's funny. It's actually really funny when I've taught people to do this. If they get the flutter going like this, and then I say, okay, now just get the if the reed, that'll stop even the reed gets even close because your oboe playing brain turns on. It's really interesting. So to try to convince your brain that it's okay to add this foreign element to the playing that you've worked so hard to not have foreign elements in, it's very psychological. But if you do that, just kind of squawk on the reed, then that'll get you over the hump, because it is, flutter tongue is more individual than double tongue, but it's like circular breathing. It's been around for thousands of years, but your brain is going to be like, nope, can't do that. I know that's not possible because I've been playing the oboe for 20 years or 10 years, and making sound equals blowing out, and not making sound equals breathing in. So I can't make sound and breathe in. It's not possible. That's what your subconscious might think. But then you just show your subconscious, yes, you can do it. And then your brain will be like, oh, yeah, I knew that. It's not the skills, it's the brain. Hello, Dr. Freud. It's very much the psychology of it, I think. Does that make sense to you, Caitlin?
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's just the best way to learn something new with the tongue. Just monkey around with it. Just kind of play around with it for 30 seconds Tuesday, 40 seconds Wednesday, 20 seconds Thursday, and your tongue will basically let its guard down.
Yeah, I've been fighting with my brain for years, so that's a really interesting perspective. I think it'll be really
Great, yeah. That's what it seems to me, right? Fighting with your brain. Struggling.
yeah.
Cool.
This is more a comment, but I found it fascinating when you were talking about the extended techniques for the oboe, is that they're super, like when you were doing the duck sound, that was one of the first extended techniques for voice that I ever learned. And it's like really well documented of like what parts of the body you're vibrating. So I'm curious if people interested in extended techniques, if you look into the more scientific vocal literature, you might find a little more science on how to learn it, which is super cool.
Yeah, and there's more and more, motion MRIs, and where you can see all those creepy things where you can see the horn player, what's happening when they articulate. It's these really strange-looking videos, but they contain information. So, over time, I think it is possible to. I think it's sort of human nature. If you sit next to somebody doing it, you'll just kind of pick it up. We tend to learn by osmosis. I mean, I had that experience. For years, I played in the Jupiter Symphony, which no longer exists, with the great oboe player, Jerry Reuter. He's such a beautiful player, magnificent oboist. And just by sitting next to him for years, there's so many things I picked up just because he was right next to me doing it 4 inches away from me. It's just the most wonderful privilege. So presumably if you show an oboe player like some video of them in an MRI doing flutter tongue, I would predict that other people would be like, oh, yeah, that's a thing, I could do it, as opposed to having me sort of vaguely demonstrate it to you. I think that helps, but maybe if we saw a scientific real-time video of the inside of their mouth doing it, that would probably encourage people. Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. That's very interesting. We do need research. Anything else on the concept of talent or this book is full of challenging ideas.
If no one else has a question, I have another one. You were talking earlier about the idea of like the expert and their ability to imagine new sounds or new concepts that are an extension of what they already know. Um, like, I guess I'm curious about ways in which you can concretely practice that skill, particularly if you're not like intensely immersed in like with a teacher or something currently.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about this book is that it really does explain it. That there's naive practice, which doesn't work at all. Which is just I'm going to learn to drive a car and then I'll get better and better. No, you won't get better and better. You've acquired a skill and then you just sort of, if anything, you get worse over time. Actually, if you go to someone who's been practicing law or something like that for 25 years, there's a good chance they're not as good as someone who's only been doing it 10 years, unless they've really worked to improve their skills. Over time, you don't get better, and there's purposeful practice, which is kind of what most people do. You kind of aim to do this or to do that. But the best practice is that deliberate practice, and it has very specific requirements. You have to be at a good high level already. You can't do deliberate practice so much if you're a beginner. But if you're already very good, and part of it is you need to have good advice about exactly how to practice. Because just kind of generic, by the seat of your pants, what you figure is a good idea isn't going to work. A lot of us don't have the humility to realize that your bright ideas aren't going to work very well. I know you're smart. I know you have great intentions, but practicing the way you think is a good idea is not effective. So just either accept that or don't accept it, but it's been proven by science. Like playing something over and over again. That's the biggest suspect. We all love to do it. It's very reassuring. Play the passage 7, 8 times. Okay, I've got it. No, you don't. Playing over and over you do not learn it. Why? Because the first time you have to do it, but then the second time, the third time, your brain's not learning anything. You're just repeating. Like a way to understand this is, what's 111 plus 85? You have to figure it out, right? Then you figure it out. Say, okay, what's 111 plus 85? You already know it. What's 111 plus 85? You already know it. What's 111 plus 85? You already know it. That's why practicing something over and over doesn't work. Whereas if you go away, change topics, and come back to it, you have to figure it out again. That's learning. So deliberate practice does not come intuitively. So just realize that doing what you think is a great idea won't work. You can't become top of your field. So to have really great advice from people who know what they're doing, which thank God now we do have that. It does exist, more so than just 30 years ago. And to be very, very focused, and also a big obstacle for people is I tell them to play something in groups of 5 if it's in groups of 4, or play something 5 times slower than it is. And they're like, all right, well, Leclair said to play it 5 times slower, da dee da, and they're just doing it. You're not going to learn anything. Deliberate practice means as you're doing that, you're thinking about your fingers, you're thinking about your head, you're thinking about noticing what's the tone, what's the intonation, you're thinking about 6 or 7 things in a very, very absorbed, curious, creative way. That's good practice. So you could take a technique and do it, but it's not going to improve you. It's not about doing the technique. It's about the quality of your cognition. Tell me the question again. I'm thinking about this. About the teacher, or what were you saying?
Yeah, I was asking originally about the imaginative quality of like learning
Oh,
new
right.
extended
Yeah.
technique.
Right. Yeah, that's an aspect of it. I'm trying to look what the term is here.
I'm also curious though, since you kind of touched on it, is like your opinion of like what the role of a teacher is in like a private setting, in a studio setting, in like different settings. Like what is a teacher supposed to do in terms of encouraging good practice?
You know, it really, I think it really is up to the individual musician practicing to, there's very little a teacher can teach you. I think we can, it's mainly to inspire and maybe some good advice. But I think for the person, each of us has to develop our own culture, and you're your teacher. I've been studying with Jackie Leclair for 45 years. I've gotten some tips from Richard Kilmer and some great input from Ronald Roseman, and I've gone to over hundreds of master classes. But I'm my teacher. There's no other teacher for you. You're your teacher. There's little bits of this and that, that you can gobble up, and I recommend being as greedy as you can. Read books, take advice, try things out. Experiment. It's like $10 bills. Take the $10 bills, put them in your pocket. Be greedy with advice. Take it. I think a lot of us, you don't take advice. It's like, oh yeah, that's interesting, and you don't do it. You left a $10 bill on the table, kid. I think the role of the teacher is to be a catalyst and to deliver value, but I can't teach anybody to do anything. It's real. The active party in a lesson is the student. It's really up to you to go. And these days you can get fantastic teaching on YouTube, and lousy teaching too. But you almost don't need a teacher in a sense. Plenty of people become a professional guitarists these days, never having a lesson. They learn on YouTube. It's fantastic. But I think I love good ideas. I love listening to people give master classes. I love people using new words or new ideas or a new metaphor. But a metaphor is not going to make you a gifted, capable professional. It could help, but you become a reliable professional performer by just working really well every day by yourself with a clear idea of what you want to accomplish. Because we all know that it's intrinsic motivations high quality, extrinsic motivations not high quality. So if you're trying to make something good to please your teacher, that's not good motivation. It's coming from your internal motivation. I've got to do this. I love this. I'm passionate about this. I forgot to go to my class because I'm practicing. I love it so much. That's intrinsic motivation. This is so exciting and so interesting, and I got to learn. I got to get this a little faster now. It's going to be great. That's what works. And a good teacher is, if you've got bad habits holding you back, which most of us do, fine. But teachers are often not very good at that. Alexander technique teachers are usually good for that kind of thing. So to find body mapping, find Alexander technique, go to different classes, get advice. And the teacher's in there somewhere, but I think it's really just all about you developing yourself,
That's great. Thanks so much, Jackie.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any lingering questions before we get off YouTube?
Did you say lingering or fingering? I've got fingerings.
Lingering.
Yeah, I thought you said fingerings too.
Any lingering fingering questions?
Okay, if not, Jackie, thank you so much for being here. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Great to see you. Great to share ideas. Great to see you,
Thank you,
Christina.
Jackie. Great to see you too. Thanks for
Great to see
the
you.
optimism and encouragement. We need a little more of that down here
Yay!
south of the border where you are.
You can do it. You can do it. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.